Growing up, even in New Zealand, I saw the same movies that everyone else did. I watched the fairy tales, I watched the romantic movies. Never once did I think I'd spend part of my 20s and the majority of my 30s pining over a married man who wouldn't leave his wife. I met him in the usual way, at work. I was new at the company and he was on his way out, so we actually only worked together for about 3 months, but in that time we grew very close. I'm an executive assistant, and while there's no training school for the role, the best EAs will tell you that the number one rule is confidentiality. You must be a vault and protect your boss's reputation. You represent him, and even if you get really close to other employees, there's a line you won't cross. You never betray your boss, regardless of how close you are to your co-workers. He realised pretty quickly that he could trust me. He had a prickly wife who was constantly ringing me to see where he was. He wasn't responding to her text, when he would be out of a meeting, off a plane, finished with a phone call, etc. I was always quick with a response or an excuse on his behalf. I managed her expectations and everybody else's. You also must be available at a moment's notice. Depending on his role, he might ring you in the middle of the night to change a flight or to book a different hotel. You're the command centre. This is how we first fell for each other. He'd been at a boozy dinner with clients and left his keys in the office. It was late and near the holidays when things are really more heightened and hopeful. I went into our office, grabbed his keys and then met him in the parking garage where he parked his car. He was waiting out front, clearly pissed, and I could smell the whiskey on his breath. He was swaying a bit, trying to hold it together. I walked with him to the car. There's no way he could drive, so decided that I'd drive him home and then Uber from his house in Herne Bay. I got in the driver's seat. It's not often that I get to drive a Porsche, and as I was buckling my seatbelt, he leaned over and kissed me in a way that no one has ever kissed me before. I felt electricity running through my body. We ended up having sex that night and almost every weeknight leading up to Christmas. He told me he was leaving this role and going to another company. He told me that he was in a loveless marriage. He had 2 children whom he adored, and having grown up in a broken home himself, he couldn't bear the idea of not being there for them all the time. But this meant sacrificing a life of love. He left for his new role in January and made many attempts to secure me a role in a new firm, but it never panned out. But that didn't stop us from seeing each other for the next 10 years. There were promises along the way, of course. If I could just hold on a little longer until the youngest graduated from high school, or college, or uni, or until his wife's business got off the ground. He told me that I was the only one who understood him or that really loved him. I tried to date, but it was no use. I'm sure people wondered what was wrong with me. Why was I perpetually single? Sometimes people would offer to set me up, and sometimes I'd just go to humour them, but it was hopeless. I was in love with someone else. After we hit our 10-year anniversary, can you call it that when you're with a man who's married to somebody else? I started to lose it a bit. His youngest was now at uni. His wife's pate business, or whatever the fuck it was, apparently was doing well. I knew this because I followed her and all of his children on Instagram, with fake profiles, of course. One Friday afternoon, I was out for drinks with my co-workers. We'd been drinking for a few hours and the crowd thinned out, leaving about 4 of us. One of my co-workers, Marion, this annoyingly chipper American, kept prodding me about why I didn't go on dating apps like her. She pulled out her profile, showed me all of the people she was talking to, and told me that time was ticking. I hate references to my biological clock, and I know that time is ticking. And as she was nattering on, I just burst into tears, which is not like me at all. I confessed everything to the group about the affair with my boss. Then Marion did something that really surprised me. She got up from the table, glared at me, and smacked me across the face. Everyone gasped in horror and Marion stormed out. I was completely confused until my other co-worker, Nikki, told me that Marion was on the apps because she'd found out that her husband had been having an affair right under her nose. So now I was feeling doubly horrible, that I'd gotten drunk and confessed this, and that I felt horrible for Marion. But I knew what I had to do. So that Sunday, I asked Marion if she'd like to take a walk. We walked all around the harbour and talked for hours. She told me the story of her marriage, disintegrating due to the affair, and I told her how I was giving up on my chance for children and a family by staying with this man. At one point during our walk, she turned to me and asked, "Why are you doing this? Do you hate yourself? Are you addicted to the secrets and lies?" Once again, I was dumbfounded by Marion. That's the thing about Americans, they just come out with it. I went home that night and decided that it had to be over. I wasn't happy. I was holding on to a dream that was somebody else's dream. He was never going to leave his wife. Not that day, not ever. So like Marion, I got on the apps. Marion and I actually checked in on each other and encouraged each other, and it felt good to be doing something healthy for myself for once. A couple of months in, I met Thomas. I thought he was pretty handsome and nice, and there was a slow build between us. At first, I practically had to detox myself from the lies and all the secrecy. Marianne was right, but I took my time to get to know Thomas, and a genuine love and friendship grew. Of course, my old boss tried to weasel his way back in, but he wasn't offering anything new, just the same old. So I stayed with Thomas. Then I found out that my boss was getting divorced, but he was marrying, wait for it, his 25-year-old assistant. I was crushed and furious. I'd wasted years with that man, and now he was running off with someone else. I kept all of this inside, of course, and when Thomas asked me to marry him, I said yes. And we have a pretty good life together. But every now and then, the urge manifests itself, and I find myself lusting after my former boss and his new life while I stalk him on Instagram and wonder what might have been.